مرحبا شباب، اليوم راح نحكي عن الاسم المنصوب accusatives. Now, I put this presentation together fairly quickly, so it's not perfect, but I'm hoping that it'll make the book's explanation, which is a little confusing, a little bit clear. Alright, so we have this thing, tanwin fatha. We've seen it a lot. We have a number of words that always come with tanwin fatha, like ahyanan, da'iman, things like that. We know that it's this double fatha on top of usually the end of the word, always at the end of the word. What it marks, and don't worry about this too much, it marks indefinite accusative words. Formal Arabic, al-Fusha, has this case system that marks words based on what function they perform in a sentence. Okay? Now, as we know, this thing is pronounced N. It usually sits on top of an aleph, which means that it shows up in unvocalized text, which is why we're focusing on it, because this is something you can see no matter whether you're reading the newspaper or a children's book that might actually have all of the vowels written in. So even if we see something in a text where they don't write the vowels in, and it says ahyanan, we know that it's ahyanan because there's an aleph at the end. Remember, most Arabic words do not end in a real aleph, they might end in an aleph maksura. The tanwin fatha can also show up on tamrabuta and hamza. And don't worry about this, but you'll occasionally see it written so that the tanwin fatha is actually on the letter before the aleph. Don't worry about that, you'll just see it. Don't let it freak you out. The main thing to recall, though, is that this case system is very complicated. It's not the basis of what we teach here at URI, but it's important to know about it because it's a big part of how other people teach the language, and because you're going to see it, and you're going to wonder what it means, okay? So, what do accusatives mark? In reality, they mark particular grammatical functions. We're not going to talk a lot about grammatical functions right now, but for example, these accusative markings will usually mark things like direct objects, things that have things done directly to them, but there's other things that it marks, and they're kind of diverse. This tanwin fatha thing is the most complex and diverse of them, and so what we're trying to do here is just get a sense of why this tanwin fatha might show up on a word. We're not trying to be able to, when we write a sentence, know when to put in a tanwin fatha. We're just trying to look at a sentence and be like, oh, I wonder why there's a tanwin fatha there. And we can sort of have what I call a heuristic, a rule of thumb. We're not trying to get a rule of grammar, just a rule of thumb. Oh, this has that tanwin fatha, and I can even tell you why, right? The best rule of thumb that we've come up with for just explaining this rule in general is that things that have a tanwin fatha on them usually answer one of these questions. Madha, kaifa, meta, aina, or limadha. The last two, aina and limadha, are either complicated or don't come up very often, or both. In reality, it's both. So what we're going to focus on here is looking at how sometimes the words with tanwin fatha will answer madha, sometimes how they answer kaifa, and sometimes how they answer meta. So, madha. We'll see tanwin fatha a lot on what we call direct objects, the thing that has something done to it. And normally the question to ask to find out about that is madha, right? So, shahadtu filman, right? I saw a movie. Madha shahadta, film. The word that we could ask madha about, tada, has tanwin fatha on it, right? Amaltu wajiban sa'ban. Alright? Madha amalta wajiban sa'ban. Notice how there's an agreement here. The adjective and the noun both have to have this mark. Alright? There's agreement. We know that things always agree in various ways. Gender, definiteness. There's another aspect. They also agree in what we're going to learn about more, the case system. Ayantu mu'idan. Madha ayanta mu'idan. I was appointed as a teaching assistant. As what were you appointed? Teaching assistant. Notice that if it has alif lam on it, we're not going to see this mark, but it still answers the question. Amiltu al-wajib. Madha amilta al-wajib, right? Notice above that we have the mark when it's indefinite. When it's definite, there is no tanwin fatha. We'll learn more about that later. But the main thing to notice is that it still has that same function, right? We don't really care always about these marks, but it's important to pay attention to the function. Notice that these are called direct objects in another language, the thing that has something done directly to it. But again, if we see this in a text, we want to explain, well, why does it have that tanwin fatha? We're like, oh, maybe shahadtu filman. Oh, it answers the question mada shahadta, right? Kaifa. A lot of these are what we would call in English an adverb, something that adds more information, describes how the verbal action actually happened, right? And we know a bunch of these, and these are more normally fixed. It's not necessarily that you can just come up with any word and just stick it in here and throw a tanwin fatha on it, and it works as an adverb. You can do that a little bit, but mostly they're fixed, right? Wallahi, dhakartu kathiran, right? I studied a lot. Kaifa dhakarta kathiran, right? So it answers the question kaifa. How did you study? A whole lot. Ahbabtuka da'iman. I've always loved you. Kaifa ahbabtani? Da'iman. Oh, you've always loved me. That's how you've loved me? Eternally, right? أذهب إلى ساعة مكتب الأستاذ أحيانا. Here it's a little ambiguous. Is it how do you go to the professor's office? Sometimes? Or is it when? Right? And as I said, when can sometimes, these can also be the answer to when. So, right, it could be كيف تذهب إلى ساعة مكتب الأستاذ أو متى تذهب إلى ساعة مكتب الأستاذ. Right? Either way, أحيانا answers one of those questions. That explains why it happens to have this mark. Notice, of course, that some of these get borrowed from Fusha into Amiya. So you have words like daiman in Amiya and Fusha. Originally it was a Fusha word. Amiya borrows it. But notice that Amiya doesn't have any of this weird case system in 90% of things, just in these sort of fossilized words. Finally, as I said, sometimes we can recognize these things and understand why they have the tanwin fatha, because they answer the question meta. As I said, أذهب إلى ساعة مكتب الأستاذ أحيانا is kind of ambiguous, right? It describes the verbal action. It's an adverb, right? In English, that would be one category. In Arabic, we kind of think of them as two, because one answers the question kaifa, one answers the question meta, and in this case, I think أحيانا could answer either question. Think about the word for tomorrow in Arabic. أنا عندي صف غدا. It always sounds like غدا. That's just, it's fixed like that, right? But that's because it always answers the question meta, right? متى عندك صف غدا. This is one of the categories where you can kind of come up with your own thing. A lot of times you can just take a time word, add a tanwin fatha to it, and it makes it into an adverb. So, amal laylan wa naharan, right? I work night and day. Meta tamil, amal laylan wa naharan, right? Say you ask somebody, well, do you drink coffee all day long? Ashrab ahwe, or ashrab qahwa, صباحا ومساء. متى تشرب قهوة؟ صباحا ومساء. It answers the question meta. These are adverbs, but they're a little more flexible because they're talking about time. So you can often just take any time word, stick a tanwin fatha on it, and it kind of acts as an adverb. All right? But again, we just want to explain why we happen to see tanwin fatha on these words. Here's your takeaway. If you see tanwin fatha, then the word that has tanwin fatha on it could probably answer some sort of question. Usually, what, how, when. Again, don't worry about producing this right now, just worry about noticing it. And trying to think when you see it, oh, what question would that answer? Is it the kind of thing that answers meda? Does it answer kaifa? Does it answer meta? Think about it, right? If you see a word in a sentence, think to yourself, does it answer any of these questions? Notice that men is not included in that question. Who, right? Because usually men is the person doing the action, and it doesn't even always show up in the sentence, right? Shahadtu filmen, the who of the sentence is ena, but it sits in the verb. Those get marked with a different case. The important thing right now is to just know that when you see tanwin fatha, it answers usually what, how, or when. And occasionally some other things, but usually it's one of those three. Shukran.